Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of the Ford Ranger 5-speed swap video series that I'm working on. To recap a little bit on part 1, I just introduced that I was going to 5-speed swap my 1997 Ford Ranger. It currently has a 2.3 liter 4-cylinder in it and the 4-speed automatic. What I want to do in today's video is sort of give you kind of like a shopping list of parts that you're going to need if you're going to go ahead and do this swap yourself. Right now I'm right in the middle of this swap. I have pretty much I think every part that I need to do it, and so I wanted to cover everything, and hopefully that'll help you if you're going to do this to your truck. All right, so let's get started. I know it seems kind of obvious, but one of the main components you're going to need is the manual transmission. The manual transmission used in these trucks is the Mazda M50D R1. Now, something a lot of people might not realize is that the bell housings on these are not removable, and so every transmission is actually specific to the engine. So if you have a 2.3 liter, you need the M50D R1 for a 2.3 liter. 3 liter, same thing. 4 liter, also the same thing. And it's actually also specific to whether or not it's 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. So you basically end up with 6 different configurations for these trucks, and you're going to have to make sure you find the one that's exactly what you need. You also notice that I have a drive shaft laying here. There are some drive shaft differences between the applications as well. The automatic transmissions that are in these trucks is a few inches longer than the manual transmission, at least in the 2-wheel drive applications. I'm not 100% sure on the 4-wheel drive trucks if that's true when you count the transfer case. But for the transmissions in a 2-wheel drive application, the automatics are a little bit longer. And so that means that the drive shaft for an automatic truck is a little bit shorter than that for a manual truck. How much shorter is it? I haven't taken exact measurements yet, but I think it's about 3 inches. So that length difference is going to be something else you have to account for when you're doing the swap. The best thing to do is going to be able to get the transmission and the drive shaft out of the same truck if you can, but that's only going to work if the truck is also the same configuration truck, whether it's a regular cab short bed or extended cab, regular cab long bed, and so on. So in my case, the regular cab short bed truck that I have, the drive shaft in that's going to be too short to use for the 5-speed swap. The donor truck was a regular cab long bed, so the drive shaft is definitely way too long, so I'm going to go ahead and have that shortened by a shop. All right, so moving on, let's go ahead and cover some of the other parts that we need. First, let's talk about the pedal assembly. You need to get a pedal assembly with the brake and clutch pedals on it out of a manual transmission truck. They are completely different brackets and everything in the automatic trucks, and you can't just add the clutch pedal to it. So you have to get this entire assembly as you see here. While you're getting that, you want to get the clutch position switch. This usually goes on the shaft of the clutch pedal. It goes to the master cylinder. So you're probably going to be grabbing all that as sort of as an assembly anyway, so make sure you get that too. In the same area, you might want to grab the grommet that goes through the firewall. It's not absolutely necessary. Right now in the automatic truck, the shift cable goes through this, and it's got a smaller hole in it. You could probably just cut the one you have a little bit bigger for the master cylinder to go through, but if you're going to grab the other parts, you might as well grab the grommet while you're at it. All right, so here I have the transmission wiring harness. Let's take a few minutes to talk about some wiring. So what I read online, everybody was saying basically you could get the transmission harness from the donor vehicle, pull out the automatic transmission harness and swap that in, the one you got for the manual transmission, and you'd be good to go. After I looked my truck over today, I don't think that's really going to be the case. And maybe that's the case for some of the earlier years, but the later years at least, I think maybe once the transmissions became electronically controlled, it looks like the harness is going to be different. So I think what I'm going to have to do is use the entire engine harness from the donor truck. So that's going to be something you need to keep in mind depending on the year of your truck. You might want to give your truck a good look over before you go to the junkyard or wherever you're going to get your donor parts from, and just make sure that whatever you're going to buy looks similar to what you already have. If it doesn't, then you might need the entire engine harness. All right, related to the transmission, I forgot to mention earlier, you're going to want to get the shift lever. There's also this rubber boot that goes over the top of the transmission hole in your console, and then the actual rubber shift boot if you're going to use that. Those are all things you might want to grab, while you're there and trying to get the other parts that you need. Something else that I recommend you do is replace some of the seals in both your transmission and on your engine. It's a lot of labor to do this, and you're going to have the transmission out. So a few of these things, it just makes sense to go ahead and do these while you have it apart. So I picked up a new rear main seal for my truck. This is a new pilot bearing. And these two seals here are the front and rear seals for the transmission. Like I said, you're going to have it all apart. It's a good chance some of this stuff's leaking anyway, so it's a good time to change it. Another thing you want to get from your donor vehicle is the computer. They are manual or automatic transmission specific, and these are usually model year specific also. So what you're going to want to look for is something that's the same year as your vehicle, just for a manual transmission instead of an automatic. Alright, so the next several parts are going to be parts that you can get from the donor vehicle, but I'm going to recommend you just buy them new. Sort of like the seals that I was talking about earlier, a lot of these parts you're going to get from your donor vehicle are going to be old anyway. So unless you knew it was recently replaced, I just recommend go ahead and getting new. So first here we have the hydraulic clutch line. So that's going to go from the master cylinder to the slave cylinder. We have master cylinder. You can get these as a kit. It comes with the reservoir, master cylinder, and everything like that. So you're going to want to pick one of those up. Then we have the release bearing and slave cylinder. This can be bought as an assembly. I definitely recommend getting this new. These are inside of the transmission bell housing and not easy to replace. So I wouldn't take any chances using a used one and having a leak on you and you have to take the transmission back out. So just go ahead and buy that new as well. So next I have the flywheel. Now this is something you could reuse. I would recommend getting the used one resurfaced. They're not that expensive to buy new though, so I decided to go and get a new one. But that is something you could reuse from the donor vehicle if you got it resurfaced. You are going to definitely want to get the flywheel bolts though from the donor vehicle. I'm not sure if you can get those new anymore, so that's something you're going to want to make sure you have. Alright, and next we have the clutch. Again, this is one of those things that it's, you're better off just go ahead and buy a new one than try to reuse old parts. You don't have to buy an expensive clutch kit. You can get some decent ones for pretty cheap. I did buy a more expensive one just for my application, but while you have it apart, it's a good time to replace it. Get in there one time, do it all, and then you don't have to get back in there again for a long time. Alright, so some other odds and ends to think about. You're going to need fluid. These transmissions take automatic transmission fluid. I think it's Mercon 5 for all of these Mazda transmissions. So you're going to need a few quarts of that. I think it's like 2.9 quarts that they hold. So pick some of that up. And then things like hardware. When you're taking this stuff apart, say you're in a junkyard, you're going to want to grab like every screw and nut and bolt that you find that you take off. Make sure you take it because you're going to end up needing it later. And when you don't have it, you're going to end up having to go to the hardware store or back to the junkyard to try to find it. This is just a few bolts, but I have a whole pile of these bolts and nuts laying around from when I took stuff off of the donor truck. And I'm going to need pretty much all of it later, so you might as well get it while you're there. Alright, a couple other last minute things that I thought of. Interior wise, you're probably going to want to get rid of your column shifter that you have in it now. So whenever you take that steering column apart, you're going to take that tube out of there. And you might want to go ahead and get a different steering column plastic piece. This is the one for the automatic. You can see the hole's really big. And the one for the manual transmission is a little bit smaller. There's actually a release mechanism there that goes just above the lock cylinder. You might want to swap that back in. That's what I did. So my steering column right now is exactly like the manual transmission truck would be. I even took out the park drive neutral indicator that's in the gauge cluster and put in the black plastic blank like the manual transmission trucks would have. So overall, I think the swap's going to be pretty straightforward. It is sort of tedious and labor intensive, but overall it's not going to be too bad. Now I think the wiring might be one of the more challenging things. One issue that I did come across, and I haven't really talked about it yet or even gotten through it yet to solve it, was that the clutch position switch that I mentioned earlier, everything I read online said that that plug for that should be somewhere tied up underneath the dash. Even the Haynes manual that I have has some sort of simplified schematics in it. It shows it with a jumper, and that's also what I read online. But I haven't been able to find it in my truck. So for some reason it looks like mine doesn't have it. So I am going to have to track down what to do about that, and if it's going to be an issue getting the truck to start later. So I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a later video. Alright everybody, so that's going to be about it for today's video. Stay tuned for part 3 where we'll probably be sort of right in the meat of this swap, and then we'll go from there. I hope today's video was helpful. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.